This morning we're going to be looking at the beginning of the writings of Jeremiah, the prophet. He begins his writings by saying, Jeremiah, the words of Jeremiah, the son of Hilkiah, one of the priests who were in Anathoth at the beginning in the land of Benjamin, to whom the word of the Lord came in the days of Josiah, the son of Amon, the son of the king of Judah, in the 13th year of his reign. And it came also in the days of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, until the end of the 11th year of Zedekiah, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, until the captivity of Jerusalem in the 5th month. Now the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and before you were born, I consecrated you. I have appointed you to be a prophet to the nations. And then I said, Oh, Lord, behold, I do not know how to speak, for I am only a youth. But the Lord said to me, Do not say I am only a youth, for to all whom I send you, you shall go, and whatever I command you, you shall speak. Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you to deliver you, declares the Lord. Then the Lord put his hand and touched my mouth. And the Lord said to me, Behold, I have put my words in your mouth. See, I have set you back this day over nations and over kingdoms, to pluck up, to break down, to destroy, and to overthrow, to build, and to plant. Jeremiah is known as one of the prophets that we call the major prophets of the Old Testament. There are 4 major prophets. It's not because their words are any more important or better than the other prophets. It's just that they wrote an awful lot of things and were able to put down a lot of their words and a lot of their understandings and thoughts and prayers to God. That shouldn't really surprise us. In Jeremiah's case, we discover, at least in this passage, that he claims to be young. And so we're looking at a human being, a person who is in the ministry of the Lord for a long time. Probably from the time he was 25 or so, for another 40 years till the time he was around 65 or so. That was his ministry. And he said a lot of important things during that time. And many of them were written down, and we have those in the book. Prophets were key elements in the governing of a country, the government of a kingdom. A wise king would surround himself with all sorts of wise men to help him to govern. I don't know why we don't do that anymore, but somebody who knows an awful lot about farming would be in charge of agriculture. We seem to take technical people and put them in charge. Somebody who knew a lot about fishing, we put over the fisheries. We don't seem to do that as well. Someone who looks after finances, someone who looks after governance, in other words, how we treat each other, how we interpret the laws and what we do with the laws that are there. We even have people who sit in the government or sit in the court of the king who are specifically there to plan out and to strategize in case there's war or warfare. And we've seen that become very important in our time as well. And then there were other people who looked after scientific things and spiritual things. And those two in Old Testament times were joined together. They didn't really make a distinction between what was science and what was just spiritual things that happened that they didn't understand. Over the last 300 or 400 years, since the time of Enlightenment, there's been a work involved in replacing the things that we don't understand with the things that we think we understand. There's been an uplifting of science and a downputting of those things that we just really don't understand, things that are spiritual, things, and because we can't prove them and can't hold on to them and can't do them ourselves, we have a tendency to disbelieve them. But prophets were specifically given the task of being able to look at things and understand things in a way that was different from all of their contemporaries. My belief that without spiritual guidance, without somebody who is able to hear the voice of the Lord, understand the writings of Scripture and the words of the Lord, and able to communicate those things without having those kind of people around, we lose a substantial portion of our understanding and our quality of life. And maybe that's one of the reasons we find ourselves in the situations we find ourselves today. There's a matter of timing in choosing someone. Jeremiah begins his ministry at a very special time, at a time of the reign of a king named Josiah. Josiah and his great-grandfather, who was a man named Hezekiah, are the only two kings that received from God a special blessing, a special word, a way of saying to them, these two men were the best of the best. These two men were the people who took the kingdom the farthest on the spiritual pathway. And Jeremiah comes in the midst of Josiah's reign. He'd been singled out. Somehow he'd been singled out to be the one who spoke at a time like this. Those two kings, by the way, were the people who were the closest to setting the kingdom of Israel on the right pathway, on making sure that they were obedient to God, that they were understanding Him, and to doing the things that He wanted them to do. But they were disobedient. And the result of disobedience or a lack of obedience brings trials and problems and failures into our life. In the mid-'80s, during one of the recessions that I lived with, we had tremendously high gas prices. I think they were 43 cents a liter, or something horrible like that. I can't quite remember all of the details, but it was pretty bad. Joyce and I were in need of a vehicle, and we had worked it out that buying a new vehicle would be cheaper for us if it was a smaller and more economical one than it would be to try to keep the car we had and all of those kind of things. And so we took a look we were living in Edmonton, in the Edmonton area at the time, so we took a look at vehicles there and decided that what we wanted was a Subaru. And we had all of the list of the various options that we wanted with it. And so we shopped around and checked out the price in Edmonton. And then we thought, well, we're going to Vancouver anyways. Why don't we take the opportunity to purchase a car in Vancouver and drive it back, save ourselves taxes and transport fees and all of that. And so we took off one weekend, one week, and went to Vancouver with a car that we were hoping to trade in, but that didn't work out. Joyce's brother decided that he wanted to come with us, and so we took this trip all together and had a great time going down. It was the time of Ghostbusters. I remember putting the tape Ghostbusters into the tape machine about 25 times in a row, and we were yelling and screaming and singing at the top of our lungs. Somehow in the midst of this, my brother-in-law decided that he wanted a Subaru too. And so a couple of days later, after we had said hi to family, we went off and toured various car lots and found one downtown that we really liked, and went in there and bargained for two vehicles at once. That really you want to see a car salesman sweat? You go in and buy two vehicles at once and play them off against each other. At least I think he was sweating, or he was crying through his glass eye. One of the things that happens to people like that. But anyways, we managed to get a good deal on the cars. We insured them, and a couple of days later we headed back to Edmonton. We stopped and picked cherries about 3 in the afternoon, and about 4:30 we were getting close to Revelstoke, and we had talked about stopping there for supper. And so I was about 20 minutes out of Revelstoke when I looked to the side, and there were all of these cars stopping and people standing around looking down this embankment. And I went past them and said, good, got all the people who are slow out of the way, now I'll be able to make some time and get there. And then I thought, I wonder what's going on there. So I stopped the car, turned around, and went back. My brother-in-law was driving his car with my son in it, and he went down the embankment on one side down to a railway track at the bottom, probably about 150 feet or so down to the bottom. I looked and I thought to myself, I wonder if that's my brother-in-law's car. And sure enough, my son was coming up holding onto tree branches saying, "That was more fun than any ride at West Edmonton Mall." And my brother was looking kind of ashen-faced, and so I quickly assumed I knew what had happened. You know, highways are there for a reason. Highways are there to keep us from going through the bush. He was knocking down trees 5 and 6 inches thick on his way down the hill. His car was obliterated. It wasn't just totaled, it was obliterated by going down. It was very fortunate that no one was injured. But if you only would have stuck to the highway. Sometimes people blame God and they say, well, God is causing all of these bad things to happen in my life. And really what's happening to them is that rather than sticking on the highway, they're trying to go another way. They're trying to go a different way. They're making a turn off the road and down a hill into the midst of trees and problems and troubles. Jeremiah had a job from God. And that job was simply to say to the king of the time, stay on the highway. Don't go down the hill where all the trees are and the rough and the brush and the gravel. Don't go that way. It's going to cause you problems. Stick on the straight and narrow. Stick on the highway, and I'll look after you. And you'll look after yourself. That's even better. Jeremiah comes back to God after God has told him these things that he might do. And he's concerned about his youthfulness. His father was a priest, and in order to be a priest, you had to be at least 30 years old. So most of us would say that Jeremiah is younger than 30, probably around 25 years old. And everybody knows that we respect our youth. Every time a young person says something, we as seniors, we rally around behind them and say, great thought, great understanding, oh man, it's so wonderful and great. Well, I'm not so sure about that. My experiences sometimes when I was a young man is getting shot down by the very people that I looked up to and that I cared about and wanted to see help me through life. And I would ask them questions and I'd either get laughs or I'd get, that's not an important question at this time, who cares, or whatever might be happening. His father was a priest. And I think that when this message came to Jeremiah, his dad wasn't on his side. His dad turned around and said, are you sure? God doesn't choose anybody under 30 to be in ministry. You got to be at least 30 years old in order to be listened to. And I think Jeremiah, in his youthfulness, looks at this very wisely and says, nobody's going to listen to me. I'm an upstart. I'm a young person. There's a cartoon I saw once. I don't know if this is the right time to say it, but it was a picture of two elderly men at a church sign, and it says on there, whippersnappers welcome. And one of the fellows is looking at the other one and saying, if this doesn't show people that we love our youth, I don't know what will. God's response to Jeremiah is, don't fear. Everything you need has already been provided. Not just in your lifetime, but from the moment of conception until now. Everything that you need for ministry, I have given to you. Now the word of the Lord came to me saying, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet to the nations. Not all of us are called to be Jeremiahs. Not all of us have this particular call on our lives. If we did, then it would be a different world. But I believe that God has touched each one of you from the moment of conception and given to you special abilities and special gifts and special passions and feelings that God wants to use to help others and to bless his church and grow his church. That's a tough thing for us. Everybody wants to be a Jeremiah. Everybody wants to be an Isaiah. Everybody wants to be at the top of the heap. And here we have people like Paul talking about toes and feet and fingers and whatever else appendages there might be in people's lives. God has chosen to bless some in a special way, but not in an easy way. And what we realized in Jeremiah's life is that he didn't have it easy. It began with God's hand on him saying, I want you to do ministry for me, and then whatever happens, trust me. Whatever happens, work with me. A few years ago, I had an epiphany. Well, it's been about 20 years now, where I had this epiphany. I used to struggle with my role as a pastor, and sometimes I do still. But I used to struggle because I wasn't sure I was the person for the job. I didn't think I could do certain things. And it was one day that God caught me by surprise. And he said to me, and you know how God speaks to us, it's hard for us to identify why we know it's God, but he does speak to us. He spoke to me and he said, I did not choose a pastor to be Roy. I chose Roy to be a pastor. And what that meant to me was that I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to be the perfect pastor in order for God to be happy with me. What's really important in our lives is that God has given us talents and abilities and ways of thinking about things, passions, and all sorts of things in our lives that he wants us to use in ministry. It's not the same as the ministry that our spouses have. It's not the same as our friends. It's not the same as our family. And it even changes throughout the years from place to place and time to time. We do different things. But what God wanted me to understand is that I don't work for him. I'm in partnership with him. God wants people to be blessed. He wants people to be saved. He wants people, and especially those who have little, he wants them to have much. He wants to encourage. He wants to strengthen them. And he wants them to know his love for them. We used to live in northern Alberta, and met a man who impressed me very much. His name was Stan. This would have been in the early 90s that I got to know Stan. I had mentioned a little bit in the introduction about the recession of 1984. Anybody remember that time in our history? Well, maybe that's good that time has passed a little bit. We've forgotten about some of those things that happened. The recession hit Stan and his family very hard. He had probably an inventory of $750,000 worth of land and houses and buildings and contracts and all sorts of things. He and his partner were doing very, very well. Within 9 months, he was bankrupt. And he had a family with 2 children and a lovely wife, and didn't know what to do. He went back to school, not to go to school to learn, but to go to school to teach. But in the back of his mind, he wanted something. He wanted to open up his own business, and he especially had his heart set on being a franchisee, and the franchise that he wanted was Beaver Lumber. And so I remember talking to him one day when I got to know him, after he had become the owner of the Beaver Lumber in our town. I remember talking to him about that. He says, I prayed about this for 9 years. He says, I prayed about this happening for 9 years. And finally, God has given me exactly what I want, and I'm ready to take on the world. They became invaluable in our church. He was on our board. He was teaching Sunday school. His wife was teaching Sunday school. Their kids were involved. Everything was A+ with them, and still is A+ with him. About 6 months after he got his franchise that he had prayed for 9 years for God to provide, Beaver Lumber decided that they were going to close down all of their small town outlets and only leave their mega stores, their box stores, open. And all those box stores were in the east. And he lost his business. And because it was a franchise, for those of you who know what happens in business, franchisees are the worst treated of people, business partners that you could ever have. In order to get a franchise, you have to sell away your life. And I remember this man going through this process. He had to take all of the stock that he had in this store and sell it. It started off well and lasted until the last hour or so. And about that time, all the vultures came in and they wanted, 10 cents on the dollar or 2 cents on the dollar in some cases. And he ended up taking a ton of stuff and just piling it on a truck and leaving. Well, 5 years later, I met him, Stan, in Grand Prairie, and he's still smiling and enjoying life. And I talked to him about what was going on. He says, yeah, those things happen. I'm okay. And what I realized with Stan is that it's because he believed that God had been leading him all along, he was able to endure all sorts of things that some people have struggles with and problems with. Jeremiah is going to go through a lot of those problems and a lot of those struggles. And God is saying to him, this is what I've called you to. And I'll be there, even though it gets tough. I'll be there with you. The end of this chapter has some wonderful things for us. Let me just share with you. Then the Lord put out his hand and touched my mouth. And the Lord said to me, behold, I have put my words in your mouth. See, I have sent you this day over nations and over kingdoms to pluck up, to break down, to destroy, to overthrow, to build, and to plant. Like Isaiah, God touches the lips of Jeremiah. And his promise is that he will fill his lips with words. Now, some people have the gift of gab. I've been around a few. A number of years ago, I was fighting a forest fire in central Alberta. We were the first ones in because we were close enough, so we got in and we did most of the original work with the fire. It wasn't one of those mega fires kind of thing, but it was serious enough. We were told that to expect a cleanup crew to come in to help us with that, and the cleanup crew was going to be coming to us from the medium security prison that was very close by, and they got the last of the helicopter rides into the site, so there was about 20 of them, and a few of us, there's a half a dozen of us from our particular work crew that I was working on. But we had to spend the night out in the middle of nowhere because the helicopter couldn't fly anymore. And so we were trapped out in the middle of nowhere with 20 people from the medium security prison and us. We had one guy who at that point in time was the only confessing Christian in the group. I wasn't him. But he quickly found a place to fall asleep and fell asleep, and he missed all the fun and joy. They had a guy there. One of the guys, he had the gift of gab. And you could almost see people withdrawing from conversation to listen to this man's stories. And he would tell story after story after story. And not being a Christian at the time, they were pretty funny. This guy was joking and having a good time. He said, best life in the world is what he's doing. He said, in the wintertime, he said, I try and get picked up and put into jail because you get 3 squares and it's heated and it's all right. He said, in the summertime, I like the fresh air, so I like to go out and I volunteer to go fight fires kind of thing. But he says, usually we get there and the fire's out anyways. And so he wanted to be a part of that. And he was telling everybody, these are the ins and outs. Don't work. Do it this way. Get your meals automatically for you. You don't have to worry about things. Go out. If you want to go and get fresh air, you volunteer for outside work, you volunteer for road crew, you volunteer for firefighting. Everything's just fine and great. And I think of Jeremiah's call from God. God says, I'm going to put my words in your mouth. It's not going to be junk. It's not going to be wrong. It's not going to be something that is different from the truth. It is going to be something that is valuable, that is important. And don't ever think for yourselves that being a part of the church isn't a high calling. It is. That it isn't important, because it is. What I find interesting, though, is the way that God tells us he works in our lives. He says sometimes you're going to be missing the highway. You're going to make that turn off into the ditch, and it's going to cause you all sorts of problems. Behold, I have put words in your mouth. See, I have sent you this day over nations and over kingdoms to pluck up, to break down, to destroy, and to overthrow. And I'm sure my brother-in-law felt that way when he was driving his car down the embankment. I don't know what my son was doing. He's a little bit crazy, but he was enjoying himself. But then God adds this, and he says to build and to plant. Not only is our task to tell people to stay on the road because that's the safe place to be, but we're also supposed to build and to plant into people's lives so that they will know the greatness and the wonder of God. You've got a head start. You've got the Lord on your side, and you have had for many years. And it's important that somehow we find the way that we share with each other. And so do that. May God bless his word to us today.